Good morning. We are in Okahumpka, Florida today, and we're doing a very, very special interview with a gentleman who has a lot of knowledge about the state of Florida and has lived in this area for a long time. His name is Joseph Branham, and we will talk with him today about some of his attributes to the community, some of his travels, some of the information relating to his early family and development, and his work in Florida to help us to understand our early Florida history. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
How are you?
Oh, I am doing very well. I do need to give the time, and the time is 10:20 a.m. And again, the weather is very nice here in Okahumpka. Beautiful sunlight today, beautiful clouds. It's just a wonderful day to be in the living land. This is wonderful to be here and to see how people have lived through all of these years and cultures. We are interviewing a gentleman who is 90 years old, and he's going to give us a lot of information about early Florida, about his life, and about some of the things that have been so important to him. We will start by asking you to give your full name.
My name is Joseph Morehart Branham.
Yes. And would you spell that last name, the Branham?
Branham is spelled B-R-A-N-H-A-M.
All right. And how long have you been at this residence?
I moved here when I was 8 years old in 1940.
I see.
In September of 1940.
Oh, you remember September of 1940. You have brothers and sisters?
No, I'm an only child.
All right, an only child moving here in 1940.
And I was born in Washington, D.C. And my mother was also born in Washington, D.C. Her name was Augusta Branham, and she was born in 1900.
All right, how about your father?
And my father was Joseph Russell Branham, and he was born in 1887, I think it was.
All right, 1887. And where was he born?
Baltimore, Maryland.
In Baltimore, Maryland.
And both my mother and father ended up getting degrees from the University of Virginia.
I see that. Your father had a PhD.
Yes, he was a chemist.
He was a chemist?
He worked for the Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C.
And how about your mother?
My mother was born in Washington, D.C. They met in Rehoboth, Delaware, I'm sure, because that is where my mother's father had a beach cottage. And my father's family also had beach cottages there. And that's where I met my wife also, so that's a big coming together place.
That's a beautiful area to meet people, yes indeed.
Rehoboth is a biblical name and it means a place of peace. Beautiful.
Now give us your birth date, please.
I was born on January 31st, 1932.
In Washington, D.C.?
In Washington, D.C. In the same hospital that my mother was born in. And I was delivered by my grandfather's brother who had his own hospital there.
And what was your grandfather's brother's name?
Frederick.
Frederick. Okay. And so now, those were your early days. How did you end up coming to Florida?
My father was a chemist. His job was analyzing the samples that were brought back from the Explorer balloons that were sent up to the stratosphere, collected air samples, and my father's job was to analyze those air samples. And the samples were kept as bubbles in capillary tubes filled with mercury. Mercury was not, at that time, recognized as a bad thing. He was also, my mother and father met in the time of Prohibition, so they were both drinkers.
Yes.
And my father was a heavy smoker, and he died of a disease called Berger's disease, which is sort of a genetic allergy to nicotine. But the combination of of mercury, working with mercury and smoking heavily, the symptoms of, or the cause of Buerger's disease being a problem is that it scars the arterioles so that the blood circulation to the fingers and toes fails, and they rot off with gangrene.
Well,
So
oh my goodness. Now,
my
how old
memory
was
of
he?
my father was when his feet were rotting away and he was most uncomfortable, but they amputated a leg and told him that and he knew that it was time to retire,
Yes.
and he was in his early 50s at that point.
So how old was your father when he passed?
I was 12 years old. I can't tell you
So
just
it was
exactly.
12 years old. You were 12 years old.
He was in his early 50s.
In his
And,
50s. Oh, I'm sorry.
And his father had settled here at Okahumpka in retirement. He spent his summers in Rehoboth and his winters here. He was a snowbird.
Of course, of course. And so
as I was a snowbird when I first came to live here.
so you ended up coming to
But
Florida.
I've ended up as a snow frog now. We've got to know.
Wait a minute, what is a snow frog?
A snow frog is a person who can live here until he croaks.
Okay, I like that. A snow frog. I just learned a new term.
And when I moved here, I was the first Yankee they'd ever met, and I didn't know what a Yankee was either.
Oh, yeah, that's another term.
And of course, my friends were crackers.
Okay, that's another. Cracker. Southern crackers.
They were
Florida
Southern
crackers.
loyalists, and they thought that the only good Yankee was a dead one.
I can imagine.
They gave me a rather hard time as a child.
Well, I can imagine that was part of it. Yes. But now, after you got here with your mother and
My mother and father came at that point. The house, his brother, my father was one of 8 children. So
okay.
They at the time of inheritance, they incorporated this property as a Deep Spring Corporation, and each of the children got a shareholder's certificate. And my mother's brother became the treasurer for that corporation. It was just a scheme for passing it on. But when my father needed to retire in 1940, his brothers and sisters gave him their shares.
And so he retired
and
here.
My uncle, yes, he retired here. His disease progressed. He spent a lot of time in Bay Pines Veterans Hospital. He was a veteran of the First World War.
Okay, World War I.
He was in the artillery, and he was deaf all the time I knew him. He was discharged from the artillery because he'd lost his hearing before he was sent to Europe.
Oh, I hear you. So this is old property, your family property.
This is yes, it has been our property and since 1923. However, in 1956, the United States Navy started leasing this property because the spring is so deep, it was suitable for the development of sonar equipment. And the 2 people from the Taylor Bottle Basin, which is between Annapolis and Washington, came down here and arranged to lease the property so that they could develop some sonar equipment. The device that an airplane can tow to detect a submarine was developed here first.
Oh, so you're on very special land then.
Yes,
and the government came in and took portions of this land, right?
And they quickly realized that the secrecy was best if nobody knew what they were doing, and they didn't change anything. So this is a bit of old Florida still, thanks to the Navy being here and trying to keep a low profile.
Wow. So this started in the early days, and then they purchased this land out here from you?
Oh, yes, they leased the little house
leased
next
it.
door from us for $200 a year, I believe it was.
Wow.
And they kept their equipment there. They had a pontoon boat called the Decibel, which they kept in the spring, and then they built a tin house that was moored with cables to the trees and the surrounding, and floated over in the spring, and they did their research from that. Then they brought this great big thing that's out here. You can take a picture of it a little later.
Yes, we will go out there later and view that area. And what's the name of the spring? And just give us a little background here.
The town, Okahumpka, is a Seminole word that means one water. And it translated as one water. And in one of the early references, William Haynes Simmons came to Florida in 1822, as when it became a territory. He was a physician from Charleston, and he came down here speculating on land, and somebody said to him he needed to go down to Okahumpka. And he came here, and he was here on February the 4th, 1822. And he wrote that there was a remarkable spring called Okahumpka. They didn't pronounce it that way. They pronounced it with two E's at the end and two E's in the middle, and that's all switched around a lot. So it was Okahumpka is the way the crackers say it, Okahumpka. So he thought Okahumpka was a remarkable spring, the headwaters of the Withlacoochee River. All right, so that's how it came to be. Then Micanopy came to live here. He came in 1813. He came of age and became the king of the Seminole Nation. He was a slaveholder, and his slaves lived close by, so then worked with them. He married a couple of them, Micanopy did. And I think that the name Billy Bug came from one of his slaves' children, because the story when we got here was that Billy Bug had drowned in the spring. He was collecting water. He backed a mule with a wagon up, and the mule didn't stop. The wagon went into the spring, and the boy and the mule drowned. And I and some of my friends have in fact found a wagon.
You did find a wagon?
In about the right place. So I think there's credibility there. But who Billy Bug was, it was a mystery to me. I did discover that there were, if you looked online for William Bug, you found that there were 3 different William Bugs in the Paramore area in Orlando. And those people were Black Seminoles.
And Paramore area was the black area, still is, in Orlando today.
That's correct. Yes.
That's exactly right. So going back to Billy Bug, you know anything else about him?
No. I've done a lot of research. There was a very famous black Billy Bug who was a pilot. That is to say, a person that directed ship traffic in Charleston, and he became famous during the Revolutionary War for his, the Civil War.
The Civil War.
For his activities.
The 1860s.
So I know that there were some bugs that prospered.
I hear you.
There are a number of bugs living around here too.
Absolutely. So that's why they named the road that we came in on?
When it came time, the road was originally named Magnolia Street. Then we got a very famous Civil War rebel here named John Jackson Dickinson, J.J. Dickinson, who retired here after when he was an older man, lived in the little house next door. And at that point, this was called Dickinson's Park. There was a big four-story hotel in Okahumpka called the Clarendon House, and the patrons from that would come to Dickinson Park, and our lane was called at that point Dickinson Road.
So it was called Dickinson Road first.
And then it changed back to Magnolia, and it's now not a paved street.
No, it's not. Well, good. Well, you're giving us some good details there. As we move along here, let's talk a little bit about your education. You attended school here in this area?
I was not a good student. In Washington, I went to kindergarten, first and second grade, and I succeeded in failing the second grade, so I had to repeat that. It turned out it was because I couldn't see and I wasn't able to read.
Oh. Yeah, poor eyesight.
Always excuses, but
yes.
that one. Then when I got here, I was in the third grade in Okahumpka Consolidated School, which was a whites-only school. It was a big, pretty building. I'll give you a picture of it later on if you like.
Wonderful. Okay, and, so you went there from the third grade to the sixth grade.
Yes, except that at that point my father was in the hospital in Bay Pines, so my mother went down to be close to him, and we were in St. Petersburg, and I went to St. Petersburg, and then we spent summers in Rehoboth, and this was during the Second World War, and my uncle ran out of the necessary ration tickets to be able to get enough gas and tires for his car to take me home.
Well, let's tell us, hold on before we go there, what were the ration tickets? Tell us what they were. The ration tickets, you know, they had to have ration tickets. Yeah. What were they?
Well, there weren't things to be bought, so if you wanted to get gasoline, you had to save. Everybody was allotted a little bit, and it was determined with ration tickets, and you were, depending on what you did, you were issued a ticket that said you can buy 10 gallons of gas a month.
And these tickets came from the government?
They were issued by the government.
All right, that's what I wanted to clarify. And so he had the ration tickets.
So I was trapped in Rehoboth. So I went to, in the fifth grade, I guess, I went through from September to Christmas time, I guess. Then they got us enough money to go back to Richmond. Got enough ration tickets to take us to Richmond, Virginia. So I went to Richmond. Went to school for a little while in Richmond, and then when I wasn't doing those things, I was going to school in the Okahumpka Consolidated School.
In the Consolidated School.
And then that took us through the sixth grade, and then I moved to Leesburg High School, which was an integrated school.
And you said you were at the Leesburg High School 7th through 12th grade.
Was a segregated school. I got the wrong words here.
Okay, so you finished high school.
I was a student there, and in the 10th grade I came down with malaria.
Oh my.
And missed so much school I had to repeat the 10th grade.
I see.
And I graduated from Leesburg High School in June of 1951, and I entered the University of Florida in June of 1951 as a freshman.
All right, and so you got your AA degree, and then?
At the University of Florida, my goal was to become a chemist, but they had the C courses that you had to take, required courses. Of course, nobody wanted to take them because they were required. However, they changed my life because I learned a great deal about things that I didn't know about. I put off biology until the last because the C6 course was the hardest one, and it was the one that most people failed, and it was a disastrous course.
I hear you.
But I signed up. I put it off till my second year. It was a whole semester. It was a whole year's course, and the first test was a multiple choice test because there were 1,700 of us in
my
that
goodness.
class. And I didn't like multiple choice questions, and I was sure that I had failed that. The scores were posted on the door of by student numbers, which were 6-digit numbers, and they were arranged they were arranged by grades, but they were identified with numbers.
Sure.
And I'm dyslexic. Numbers are a problem. And I went up and down that list for 3 or 4 times and was becoming extremely frustrated because I couldn't find it. And somebody came over and said, "Oh, there it is," and it was the top number.
Wow.
And I had always been going to the bottom and working up.
See, you always have to look up
So
instead of looking down.
I very quickly became a biology major.
All right, and then you went to Florida State University?
Well, the professors at the University of Florida, Archie Carr and Tom Odom and Coleman Goyne, had all come to study the life in our spring when I was a kid. And so they knew me, and they had actually gotten me interested enough in the fish so that I was actually learning their scientific names and that sort of thing. I was learning the local names from them, from a black lady that used to come and fish here.
I see.
And she taught me the fish, and she taught me what they called.
Do you remember her name by chance?
Sure, she was Georgia Paxton. She was a very nice lady, and she was probably one of the black Seminoles, although at that point I didn't know about that, and so I can't speak for her. But she lived separately. Okahumpka was racially divided very strongly. The black people lived in the quarters.
Yes.
And yet the Paxtons lived on land that they owned on the other side of our community.
So let's, now that you're getting involved with Florida State University, and there you were able...
So I changed my major.
Yes.
I knew the people that had been here and became friends with them. And I decided I liked invertebrate zoology. I was friends with the invertebrate zoology teacher, whose name was Elo Pierce, E period, L-O-W period, Pierce.
Pierce.
His family were boat builders from Key West, although he was the world's authority on keating gnats, were a planktonic form of life in the ocean. And he asked me to stay and help him build a boat that they could use to try to create a marine laboratory at Cedar Key. So I became friends with Elo Pierce, and as I was finishing my sophomore year, he called me into his office and said, "Joe, you won't like what I've got to say here, but I'm going to recommend that you move to Florida State University." He said, "You're the only honest biology major we have. All the rest are pre-med, and they cheat. So you go to Florida State." And the second issue was that I had a girlfriend. Florida had been co-ed for 2 years when I started there.
Okay.
And there were 75 men for each girl student. And I had a girlfriend. She was Jewish. And I was desperately in love. And she decided that she wasn't going to marry a Gentile.
Right, she's married in her culture.
So I was happy to move to FSU where the ratio was reversed.
Yes.
So I had 4 or 5 friendly girlfriends there. But I had to go to the University of Delaware. One summer in Rehoboth, I met Margaret Branham, my wife.
Yes.
Margaret Ann Taylor Branham from Centerville, Maryland. And
So
we have
that's
been married now since 1956.
a wonderful life here. Wonderful. And you married a librarian, too.
And she became a librarian. Because I ended up at FSU. I got a bachelor's degree. I got a master's degree. Margaret and I married the year I became a master's student. Then I got a, I knew that I was going to have to be, I'd been in the ROTC, so I knew I was going to have to be a lieutenant in the Air Force. But when it came time for me to be drafted, they took me over to Jacksonville. They took us into a warehouse. They said, take your clothes off and put them in the locker. I did. Put your glasses in there too, boy. And I said, but I can't see without my glasses. Put your glasses in there, damn it.
You put them in there.
So I did, and he took me by the hand and led me down the hall. There was a doctor in his white suit standing at the door, and the sergeant said to him, this boy says he can't see. Give him an eye test. And the guy took me in and pointed to, and said, read the letters. And I did my thing. And I said, I can't see any letters. And the doctor looked at the sergeant and said, take him away. He's looking at the window.
Oh.
So now I didn't know what I was going to do, because I had set my whole view on being a drafted soldier. And it turned out, no, I had nothing else to do. So I decided, well, I'll just see if I can get to be a master, get into the graduate program. So I went into the Florida State University's Oceanographic Institute, and I asked the secretary in that office, what do I do to become a graduate student? And she turned around and said, ask him. There was a guy sweeping behind the door. He had on bib overalls, and I assumed he was the janitor. So well, excuse me, sir, what do I do to become a graduate student in the Oceanographic Institute? I said, sir, and I looked at the secretary. He said, he's asking you, can you row a boat? And he had such a strong accent
that you didn't
Virginia
understand.
accent that I couldn't understand him.
I hear you.
And then after that, he looked at me and said in more understandable terms, now that I'd gotten the idea what he was saying, he said, all right, boy, you're a graduate student now. I'm going to hire you to go to Apalachicola, East Point, and buy 2 bushels of oysters on Tuesdays and Thursdays and deliver them to the home ec department. So I had a I don't know, you wouldn't call it a scholarship. I was employed. My tuition was waived, and I got a master's degree in a couple of years. I got a wife at the beginning of that process.
All right.
So I was supported not only by the Oceanographic Institute, but by a wife who was, at that point, a medical technologist at the big hospital in Tallahassee.
In Tallahassee. All right. Well, it sounds like you were doing quite a bit. But let's move on a little bit further. Now, you have served in several jobs. Kind of tell me some of the jobs that you've had. It says that you've been in Atlanta. You've been assistant professor. You've been around in many positions over the years.
Yes, after I got my PhD, or the year before I got my PhD, I took a job at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta.
Yes,
At that point, I broke the odds and actually went ahead and finished my degree and wrote my dissertation.
Yes, in 1962.
I was interested in doing research on fertilization, that is to say, the coming together of a sperm and an egg to create a new individual. We used sea urchins, and I did my research on marine things,
All right.
I did summer research as I had a Laylar fellow to do research at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts.
And that's what I wanted to ask you a little bit about. Tell me a little bit about Woodhull, because that's a special place also.
Oh, yes,
and
indeed.
so few people get that opportunity to go there.
That's right. But to finish the
okay, we'll finish.
I'll come
yes,
back to
we'll
that.
come back to that.
But,
yes.
But from there, I decided that the sperm that's going to become the father of that next generation probably swims better than other sperm, because the first one there is it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was studying how fast sperm swim.
Okay.
And I had discovered that if the technique I was using was to separate two different populations of sperm, one that swam well and one that didn't. Mm-hmm. And the people at the Institute of Animal Genetics in Edinburgh, Scotland, took interest in that because some sperm carry an X chromosome, others carry a Y chromosome. Mm-hmm. Maybe the fast swimmers, maybe we could use this as a technique for separating males from female generating sperm. And that's what I spent 2 years at the University of Edinburgh.
Uh-huh.
Edinburgh is a very gloomy, cold place, or at least it was in those days.
In those days, huh?
And I had a job. I had job offers to be teacher and to be at the University of Central Florida, the University of South Florida. Mm-hmm. But then I got an offer to go to Hawaii.
Yes, I see here, University of Hawaii.
And that was a big mistake because my growing up, I was a very liberal person, and the people on the faculty at the University of Hawaii were the other extreme. Mm-hmm. And I did research on the star of the crown of thorns starfish.
Oh, on the starfish, okay.
And our department got a big grant to analyze the problems. The starfish was killing the reefs. Westinghouse decided that we could make a lot of money by protecting the reefs. We need to learn about these starfish so we can kill them. Oh. Well, the crown of thorns starfish was found to be a pest killing reefs by people on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And their solution was to say, or their hypothesis was to say that this huge sea star is a mutant formed caused by the Americans setting off atom bombs in Bikini. And it's going to overwhelm the reefs and kill them all. That was the story. Well, that didn't fit my understanding of biology at all. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I did was to find out what the scientific name was. It was Acanthaster plankii. Well, that set me off. If you know the scientific name, you can go to the library,
right,
and you can find the descriptions. It was done by the very first person to give it that name. And the very first person to give this starfish its name was Carl Linnaeus, who named it Asterias plankii in
well,
I've forgotten the date, but
don't worry about the date.
He was way back then, and then I discovered that later on somebody had added the acanth part to it, which means spiny starfish.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't know who plank was. I didn't know what plankii meant, and then I discovered that he had named it in honor of a professor at the University of London who had sent him 9 specimens of this huge starfish that had been collected in the Red Sea by a Portuguese expedition in the year 1600.
Oh.
Well, that sort of took care of the thesis, the idea that it was an American mutation, caused mutation.
I hear you.
But that was also not popular because the Westinghouse people who were paying for this research didn't want to pay for research that said this is a good thing rather than a bad thing.
A bad thing. I could follow
So
you
I
on
did-
that.
So I lost money for them, and we became just. And then I decided, well, heck, I'm just going to retire from this. I don't want to get caught
And
up in
so
all
then-
this politics. And I came back to live in Okahumpka.
And so this is how you got back to Okahumpka.
That's how I got back to Okahumpka.
And that came early because you worked here for quite some time.
And I'll come back to
You
your.
said 1940. Let's see, moved to
I
Oklahoma.
came back here in 1970.
Okay. You returned in 1974. You returned in 1974 to Oklahoma.
I retired in '74. We decided to go camping through the West before we came back to settle here. So we had a Volkswagen camper that we bought in Scotland, and we camped all through the Western California, Oregon, Washington. And on our way back, I stopped in Salt Lake City to visit one of my graduate student colleagues, and he asked me to stay and finish a program on studying the stoneflies.
The stoneflies.
Stoneflies are organisms that grow up in the water.
Oh.
They turn into, they live as helgamites in the water for a year. Then they turn into a fly that flies up the river to the top of it, lays its eggs, and then the helgamites mature as they come down the creek. And this is cold, cold water, freezes in the wintertime. But they were planning to build a nuclear power plant up at the top of Little Cottonwood Canyon. And the program had been started to determine whether the warmer water would interfere with the growth of the stoneflies.
Of the stoneflies.
And the person that was doing that had developed dementia.
Okay.
And they needed somebody to finish it. So I spent a year and finished the project there. And then I came back with the idea that I'll just grow up in my dear old town of Okahumpka.
Right. Well, let's go back just a minute on the stoneflies. This was 1973 and 74.
That's
just
right.
for the record.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
And then you decided to return. You returned in 1974 to this area.
Right.
Okay.
Now, you were asking me about MBL in Woods Hole. And I did research there. In a little while, I'll get out a picture and show you the kind of things, and you can add that to your collection if you like. But when I came back to live in Okahumpka, it was the time when integration was beginning, and my experience as a child, I had a great deal of trouble adjusting to the concept of segregation because I was friends with the black people as well as the white people. The white people tended to beat me up because I did that. But when I was about 20, I became very concerned about the problems that were coming from this horrible segregation. And when I was at Woods Hole, I met a black family from South Carolina. I can't remember, maybe it was North Carolina. Anyway, one of the really bad, they were nice, and I've forgotten his name now, but he and I became friends, and we did things together. And I asked him if he was more comfortable in Massachusetts than he was in the Carolinas, thinking that maybe this would be. He said he used some vulgarities here. He said no. He said it's worse here in Massachusetts. Because if we go into a restaurant and sit down and I don't get waited on in 15 minutes, I have to get out and leave. And here I have the faintest idea whether these people are going to be nice to me or be bad to me. So I'm happier at home because I know my place.
You know your spot. You know
That's
what
right.
you can and can't do.
And while I was a student at FSU, I also became a rabble-rouser. When I was about 8, Mother and I were on the porch here, and we would hear the train come through Okahumpka, and we knew that that was when the mail arrived. So you give them about a half an hour, and they put up the mail. Then I would ride up to the post office to get the mail on my bicycle. I was probably was about 10 when this happened, but I'm not sure. And it was a long time ago, and I've gone over this story many times before. And I've become an honorary cracker. So I'm not sure how much of this is real and how much of it has developed in my feeble mind over the last 80 years. But at any rate, I arrived, and this was during the war. And the post office was in a large two-story building. The downstairs was a saloon for white people, and the upstairs was a saloon for black people. And the post office, just a little room in the corner. And Mrs. Atz, who owned the building, was the postmistress. At any rate, I rode up there.
Who was the postmistress? What was that person's name?
Mrs. Atz, A-T-Z.
Oh, A-T-Z, Mrs., And she was the postmaster.
And she was also the barkeeper. And the upstairs was the juke joint.
And the upstairs was a joint, juke joint.
And I'll fill you in on what a juke joint is in a little while.
Yes, we know, but it would be good for the tape that we understand.
You know the word, but you don't know its background yet.
Right.
Okay, at any rate, I kicked down my kickstand, and a black Jeep drove up beside me, all open. It was the sheriff. The sheriff would be a deputy of Willis McCall's.
Yes.
And his name was Bubba Reeves. And we all feared him because he was a sheriff. At any rate, he got out and he looked up on the upstairs. There was an outside porch around all that building, up in the corner.
That was where the blacks were, upstairs.
Was a guy sitting on the corner on the railing, talking to two other black young men. And the sheriff got out of his car and said, "Hi, Joey," and took his shotgun, blew the head off the guy that was sitting on the railing, and the body fell down right next to me. And I didn't really understand what was going on. You know, I was 10. I mean, that was a memory that just won't leave, and it gets worse and worse as I rehash it.
Well, do you know the name of the black man?
No, but I think you'll find that there are other people there.
Okay, and the sheriff's name was Bubba Reeves.
Yes.
And about what time? What year was this? You said it was during World War II.
Well, that would have been probably 1942. I would say it was either probably I was about
42,
I moved
43.
here when I was 8. So
So and the town was okay.
And at any rate, and you have read Devil in the Grove.
Oh yes, I have.
Well, then you understand the motives of what people were doing, and I later on discovered that Bubba Reeves had a deal with Judge Beach. Judge Beach would have not been a judge at all, but he was in our little town, and he was Judge Beach, and they were watermelon growers. And the scheme was to hand a dollar bill to every young black buck that they could find. They'd give a stack of dollar bills to a little boy, and he was to go through and hand out a dollar. A dollar would buy 5 or 6 bottles of beer. The young guys would then go to the saloon and drink, and Bubba Reeves would arrest them for drunkenness. Judge Beach would fine them $25 or jail, and you can work off the $25 by picking watermelons for us. And apparently this young man had discovered that and was advising his people, don't take a dollar bill from anybody. And you and I met at the Virgil Hawkins office memorial celebration a little while ago. And my father had hired Hawkinses to work in the orange grove in those 40s.
Oh, okay.
And I have retained a violent feeling about racism ever since I had that experience. I've seen a second black man killed.
Mm-hmm.
I was a student at FSU. This was in 1955.
All right.
And I had come home on the Greyhound bus to visit, probably Easter or Christmas, I don't remember which. And on the way back to Tallahassee, the bus stopped in Ocala,
Mm-hmm.
and an elderly couple got on the bus. He was a black man. He had on a suit, a vest, a tie, white shirt. She was a dignified-looking, gray-haired, rather rotund white woman. And instead of going to the back of the bus, they sat down a couple of seats in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And the tension on that bus was sparking.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And when we got to Perry, Perry is about 50 miles
I know where
this
Perry,
side of,
Florida.
of the bus had a necessary stop. And when the bus stopped, and I every time I ride by that place, I look at that, and this is where that happened. It's still a big emotion to me. But the bus driver says, "I want y'all to stay on the bus. I got some business first." And he got off, and he came back with half a dozen white young rednecks, cowboy boots and cowboy hats, and he stood right outside my window on the bus, not air conditioned in those days.
Yes.
And I heard him say, "I want you boys to go on and get that nigger and kill him." And those people, 6 of them came up on the bus. They grabbed that poor old man's by his shirt and dragged him off the bus and threw him down on the ground and started kicking him with their cowboy boots. And the bus then drove off to Tallahassee. Next day I discovered that they had killed him.
Yeah, the wife was still on the bus.
And the wife was still on the bus. But at that point we didn't know they were man and wife.
Yeah, well,
But the explanation that came out was that they were a married couple from the Bahamas,
okay.
and they just did not know the customs.
And did you ever find out what the man's name was,
No,
or
I
the
didn't.
wife's name?
If I did, I don't remember it. I'm bad
Okay,
with-
and we're saying this was in 1955?
It was the year before before Margaret and I got married. And we married in '56, so it would have been 50.
So it had been in 1955, and it was in Perry, Florida.
That was a rather
And you
violent.
think it was around Easter time? You think it was around Easter?
Oh, either Easter or Christmas.
Christmas, okay, let me put
Because
Christmas in.
those were the only 2 times I would make that
That you would
long
be
trip
riding
to
the
be-
bus.
Yeah.
And so the bus drove off, so you all never knew anything else
We
about
didn't
it.
know. I didn't know anything except that I was terribly upset by this
Yes,
whole
sir.
bus. And at that point, that was also at the time that Rosa Parks was
1955, you're right.
okay. Well, at the
December.
all the black people rode the bus in Tallahassee, and they went on strike, and it was all full in the newspapers about the strike. And I thought to myself, what will happen to me if I got on one of those empty buses and sat in the back seat? So I went down. I'd never ridden on one of those buses before, but they were all parked in around the Capitol, and I walked down from there, and there was a bus, nobody in it, driver standing outside talking to 2 guys. I got on. I handed him I think it was a nickel or maybe a quarter, and went and sat down in the back seat. And pretty soon that guy came back and he said, "You can't sit there, boy." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "That's for niggers." I said, "There aren't any people here, just me." I said, I like to sit on the back seat. And he got off the bus, he went and got a policeman, they came back and they arrested me. And they took me down to the jail, and they palavered for a while, and then they just, a lawyer came in and they concluded there's no law against this, so we can't hold him, so they let me off. And at that point, I had a good friend that we were making our own. I like music. I learned that in C2, Humanities. At any rate, we were making a kit tape recorder.
I see.
And I liked classical music, and I knew that the people at Florida A&M performed each year a fantastic performance of the Messiah.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, well, gosh, we've got these things to record. Let's go to FAMU and see if they'll let us attend their practices and test our machine. And there I met a black woman who was involved with that. She turned out was a biologist. Her name was Margaret Collins. And we became friends, and we recorded the practices. And then she said, why don't y'all come to the performance? We'll save you some seats. So Harry and I each got a date. When we got to FAMU, that's a big auditorium. They had saved us 4 seats on the 4th row, right in the middle, and Margaret Collins was there and greeted us and seated. So here were 4 people, two white women and 2 white guys in a sea of black faces. And it was a fantastic experience. The next day or so, I got a letter from the president of Florida State saying that if I ever took a white girl on that campus again, I would be expelled.
Oh.
I still have that letter somewhere around.
And that was, what year was that?
That would have been 55.
That was 1955 also? Okay, and that was at FAMU.
And then I got married to Margaret, and in 56, Margaret and I both liked music. We were going to the Florida State was going to have a special program. Louis Armstrong was going to perform.
Oh, yes.
So we went down there and we sat there amongst a sea of white faces and didn't start. Finally, the dean came out and said, I'm sorry that we haven't been able to start yet, but there are some unwanted people in the audience, and we're not going to have this performance until they leave. And the 6 black guys who were sitting on the back row got up and walked out, and then we got to listen to Louis Armstrong.
Now that is awful. And he's black.
Yeah.
And then after they walked out, then they had the program.
And they had the program. And at that point, my job was to collect sea urchins to do research with at St. Andrews State Park in Panama City. And one February, when I went over to collect, I had a white undergraduate student with me and Margaret. And we went into and we had a pass. We had a letter that said we could go in and collect the sea urchins on the jetty. And the guy collecting tickets knew me at that point. And so I waved and went on in. And we were the only people in the park. I collected my sea urchins, and this was a segregated park.
Okay.
And I said to Margaret, let's go into the black area. There's nobody here. Let's see if it is in any way equal. The white people were fishing from the jetty on the river, on the inlet, and the black people had a pier that went out over the beach. And Margaret and I and this boy, we walked out on that pier. It was drizzly rain, and when we came back, the ticket agent was standing at the end of the pier with his pistol drawn, going to arrest us for going into the black area.
Oh.
And it took me quite a while to talk him into not taking us off to jail. And after that, I got a letter from Leroy Collins, the governor.
He was the governor.
Who said that I'm no longer, Joe and Margaret Branham are no longer welcome in Florida state parks because they can't obey the rules. I've got that letter somewhere too.
Oh my
so
goodness!
Now you
those would be, yes.
Now you under, and I actually walked in the Black Lives Matter parade that we had here in Leesburg.
You've been standing strong for a long time.
I have had this very emotional relationship difficulty of understanding things. And I am convinced that we're all racist, but it ranges from the hateful ones at the red end to the loving ones at the blue end. But in between, most of us understand each other.
Right.
But at the extremes, they're ready to kill each other. And right now it's getting to be so divided that it's almost as bad as it was in the Jim Crow era.
I agree with you 100%.
Boy.
Yeah, we're dealing with that every day. Every day.
Which is why I'm so happy to have you come to interview me.
Well, I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate you all coming toward me saying, look, can you come back? And I have truly enjoyed what we have done today. And I see this as a means of sharing what people need to know about each other.
Amen.
Because we don't understand each other. And then also all these early things that we have learned that we're carrying forward are hurting us. They're hurting the way we think. They're hurting our youth. They're hurting progress for our country and for other countries too. So we are in a predicament at this point.
Margaret and I just made a trip to Brussels and Holland.
Yes.
And in Brussels and in Amsterdam and in Rotterdam, big modern cities, blocks and blocks of apartment houses. In each city I saw a big mural on one of those buildings, or maybe several of them, of George Floyd.
And it needs to be.
And you don't see that in this country,
no.
But you did in those countries.
No. Yes.
And they were proud of them.
Very proud, very proud. Well, we just have to keep holding firm. And of course, I believe in prayer, and I believe in doing what's right and treating your fellow man right. And I think based on that alone, change is going to come. It's got to come. We can't keep going this way. I hear and see every day things that frighten me, but we are able to go forward. Yes. And I want to thank you. I'm going to close out our interview for today and see if we can get time to speak again.
Yes,
and I would like to do that on Zoom, so I will not be coming back to your home, but I'd like to deal with issues. And this is one issue that I'd like to deal with on a whole hour of Zoom. And maybe deal with another time of dealing with the relationship to the early Indians in relationship to how they have progressed and how the Africans and the Indians worked together during the early days. That's a whole nother session.
I was hoping it would work that way.
Yes, and so I see 2 or 3 good sessions that we can have by Zoom. This meeting today was to get an overview of you, an overview from your family and where you are today.
And that's why I wanted you to come here to do it.
Yes,
so
and I'm so pleased to do that. And then we will also take time and go out in the yard and visit some of your areas and so forth, and make this as a general. And then we'll come back and deal with issues and have those available so that people can go to the sociology, the folks, those that want to deal with the biology and the scientific activities, even deal with your travels, because you've done some outstanding travels and that you can share and help us to understand. plus the early history of Florida is great here. And so I thank
Okahumpka
you.
is important enough to need to tell the world
it
this.
needs to be. And I'm going to tell you, I'd love to see a picture of you sitting here with your feet. I think that is just so neat. And then the use of the terms that you are giving us. I like the term you gave in the beginning. What was a cracker? Now, for me, I understand that, but for a student that listens to you,
What do you think a cracker is?
well,
where do you think that name
now,
comes
you know,
from?
they said it was a whip.
Well,
That's what they said. It was a whip that they cracked.
I had a visitor from Germany, a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
Margaret and I took her up to St. Augustine, and we were going through the oldest house there.
Yes, we've been.
And my son Charlie was an anthropologist at the Gray Building in Tallahassee.
Uh-huh.
And one of his friends was the docent there. I didn't know him at that time, but later on Charlie told me. Anyway, we went in there. There were two other groups of people there. They were from New York. Mm-hmm. And the docent took us around. He was dressed like a cracker. He did his thing.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of it, he said, "Y'all know where we got our name, Cracker?" And the other guys didn't do anything. And said, "Yeah, it's because they were cowboys and they cracked a whip."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Nope, you're wrong."
That's wrong. I know the other one too, but I'll let you tell
And he
it.
said that Shakespeare used that term in print first.
He did.
And you've read what I've read then, so you know where I'm coming from. Okay, and it's true because when we were in Scotland, we went to cracks occasionally.
They were there, and they're still there.
And that's why I warned you at the beginning that my stories have developed now, and I'm an honorary cracker, so some of that you just heard is believable.
I hear you. And we're closing the interview in Okahumpka, and the date is June the 13th? Yes. Monday, June the 13th, and we are in Okahumpka, Florida. And we're getting ready to close out the interview, and we're going to take a few minutes to walk around the grounds and get some very nice pictures that we can add to this interview. And we're opening the double doors to this beautiful...
It's like when I was a child, I had a BB gun, and I shot that.
You did.
and learned how to replace window panes there.
All right.
When you say that, oh, that's beautiful.
Everything.
So these screens have actually been here probably over 100 years.
Now that's good that you can keep those screens for 100 years.
Yeah,
Most of the times they rot out. They
That's
don't
right,
last that long.
and they're steel.
And what is this up there?
Oh, it's a wren nest.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
It was a woodpecker nest once upon a time. No.
Okay. Well, we're going to walk over to the gazebo, which is in this direction. It's a beautiful sort of circular unit over there to see some of the artifacts that has been gathered from this place over the years that was picked up by Chip, you said, when he came out here and did the penetrating radar on the land. Am I right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a photograph I can share with you. There was a big alligator. Somebody had shot. Mr. Jaggers had shot it, and he's standing there with his rifle, and a whole bunch of children are sitting on the back of this huge alligator that's dead.
Thank goodness he did.
And that was in 1925, I think. Mm-hmm. But these trees were here at that point too, so you can spot where the spots are. And when I was a little boy, I hung out with a professional snake catcher named George Hunt, and he taught me how to catch rattlesnakes. Mm-hmm. And his business was to catch rattlesnakes and take them to Ross Allen in Silver Springs, where we were developing the process of antivenoms.
Oh, Oh, so they
And-
use the snake skin, the venom, and everything.
So I went up there as a child and I saw this Ross Allen, who was putting on shows for the tourists by getting in the water and wrestling with alligators. And heck, I used that as my diving board. I'd climb up in there and jump in as a child. And then I decided the alligators would cruise underneath, and I dropped down on the back of an alligator and caught it and rode it. And that became our excitement.
Oh,
And
my
finally,
God.
the alligators got to be afraid to come under there. And I asked my mother, who was a little bit smaller than you are, if she'd row me around in the boat. And she did. She rowed me around in the boat, and I'd jump in and catch alligators.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, you've had a life out here. I'm telling you, he's truly had a life.
But as you see, that's a good
Yeah,
place
that's
to,
a nice
perfect
part.
to do.
Yeah, and you got your
Because
swing out here.
The water under that tree is 12 feet deep, right under the nearest part of it.
Oh. So you really know your land.
And right where she's standing, they dug one of their archaeological sites, and at the bottom of it, they found evidence of people that had lived here 8,000 years ago.
8,000 years ago? For sure.
The archaic Indians. They found
8,000.
orangeware, which is the beginning pottery from 8,000 years ago, and they found chips of things.
Wow, that they used 8,000. You can imagine.
So, and well, the water from here flows either that way into the Gulf down the Withlacoochee River, or that way down to the Ocklawaha River. So this would have been an area inland where the people could have actually traded with either coast.
Oh, and then
So-
they had the store here, what they call the commissary or whatever.
Well, I'm talking long before
long
that.
before that,
I'm
long
talk-
before that.
Yeah, so I'm talking 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Oh my God. So you said, ooh, this is precious land.
So this was an urban center, if you will,
It was.
in its day.
Well, just by location of the water alone made it an urban center.
I'm pretty sure it's here because it was accessible. They didn't have roads.
That's
They
true.
had
They had to depend on the
trails,
waterways.
and their commerce, all of it, would have been by water.
And I see you had your kayak.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
oh yeah. Both. I built both of those canoes.
Oh really? Uh-huh. Yeah, isn't there some poison ivy out here? Maybe not.
no, I don't
No,
think
that's
so.
not. There's something else.
There is poison ivy, but there's none where we're going to be.
Oh, this is nice. Oh my goodness.
So,
Look
Chip-
at all this that he's pulled out of the
now
ground.
these special axes, when they
This.
that.
Oh, that
this-
was
this-
from
This is called a box axe. Chip has found, I think, a dozen of them. And that one still got handled.
yeah, I see where the handle would fit
No.
on there and pull out.
In the turpentine business, what they would do was
They
to
chip the-
scrape they would create a cat face, that is by saying this. And,
Oh, you got to show the cat face.
That's a cat face.
Yeah.
And this is the tool that they used to do that with.
Yeah, and they had to make the cat face so that the oil could run down into the cup.
Except
was-
they didn't have cups yet.
Oh, so what did they have?
They had a hole that they cut into the tree itself with that long axe that was called a box. So
Oh.
the sap would run down in there, and they'd come through and scoop it out.
And then they had to, okay, I can see that.
And in the year 1900, the year my mother was born, a Dr. Hurdy from Philadelphia decided they needed to, instead of cutting the tree, they would hang a cup on it.
Mm-hmm. And then it dripped
and
directly.
that was called a hurdy cup. And
a hurdy cup. That's how the name came about.
And that replaced this by 1910. The boxes were out of business. Mm-hmm. So all of this must predate the hurdy cups.
Oh,
and the hurdy cups didn't last very long because they very quickly discovered the tin cup would work better, easier. And this Chip found also. Feel it. It took us a while to figure out what that was too.
Oh, this is heavy.
Yeah, that's copper.
Copper?
Copper.
Look at that, copper.
And it's obviously been involved in an explosion.
Oh, that's how you knew that the explosion had occurred.
This was a piece of the boiler, and it exploded and probably killed off a lot of people.
Oh, I'm
Here's
sure.
another piece of it that he found.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that probably came from up on this end.
Who knows? I mean, it would have been a big thing.
That would have been a major activity.
And the people that did the work were black slaves. And after the Civil War, they were black prisoners.
That's right.
And here's the chain from Chain Gang.
Oh my Lord! Ooh, ooh, ooh! Look at that. A piece of the chain.
And in 1990, January, I joined the University of Florida's Lake Watch program. And yesterday, I took the Lake Watch sample, and it's halfway through the 32nd year for doing that.
Wow.
So I'm still playing scientist.
I hear you. You'll never stop.
Well, to stop you, soon move on to a different lifestyle.
I hear you. I hear you.
And I'm trying my best to
Delay it.
stick with what I've got left.
That's right. Have you had students to come out here like from Girl Scouts and Boy Scout camps and places to identify all of the different...
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
We used to do that all the time.
Yeah.
Because they would take samples back and then learn what they were and put them in the right categories of scientific...
That's right.
Yes.
When I taught biology, I would take people out on the campus to walk around and do just what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of that with students.
And the name spring is?
The mainspring is,
Yeah.
there's a log floating there. It has a white knob on it. I have a pipe that goes down to the edge of the cliff, and then it goes straight down.
Well, she's trying to get a picture of it. Did you see it?
That's over the cliff that goes down.
Like I said, she's so at home.
And the Indians made their bread from the big bulb of that plant over there. That's Kunti. It's a cycad.